Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to this session. And so we're going to, I'm going to do just some introductions of each of our panelists. My name is Janine Canty, and I'm a professor and the chair of the environmental studies at Naropa University, which is just down the street. And I teach courses that really get into climate change issues, particularly eco-psychology and deep ecology, indigenous environmental issues, and also a wilderness solo class, and multicultural perspectives for environmental leaders. So I'm definitely passionate about this topic. And so we've got, all the way at the end there, we have John Houston, who's completed major expeditions to the North Pole, South Pole, Greenland, and Canada's Ellesmere Island. In 2009, he and his expedition partner became the first Americans to reach the North Pole unsupported. The pair co-authored an award-winning book about the expedition, and he works as a motivational speaker, safety and logistics consultant, and wilderness guide. And then in the middle here, we have Odd Harold Pauge.
Well done.
Yay! He's an adventurer as well, entrepreneur and author. He's worked as a business journalist, chief editor, and stockbroker. In 1996, he founded Netavisen, one of the world's first internet-only newspapers. He's published several nonfiction books, as well as books based on his many adventures and expeditions to the South Pole, Mount Everest, and crossing of Greenland. He's the author of 3 crime novels, the latest titled Everest, a thriller with the iconic mountain as the scene. And right next to me is, that's mine, is Marcus Munch.
Disappeared.
You disappeared, sorry. Marcus works on water, climate, and social change issues across the world, including South Asia and the US, combining narratives of transformation and resilience in complex social ecological systems. He spans culture, art, and science in the pursuit of change. He's founded the Institute for Social and Environmental Transition in 1997. And so this topic is quite timely. It has been for quite a while, but in recent events, we're all aware of what's been happening globally and locally. I'm going to read the session description to orient us. With the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, skeptics have dismissed global alerts on human-made warning. While carbon-intensive economies dictate policies that impact our shared planet, environmentalists struggle for strategies to reverse environmental damage and sensitize people about it. So our session's about climate change, urbanization, social justice, water resource across borders and cultures, and probably some emergent properties. And so as I was mentioning, we're very aware with particularly US-centric with Harvey and Irma, at the same time with having record-breaking forest fires, many people in the US are really opening their eyes to climate change and the disasters, and particularly with recognizing that this is happening worldwide. At the same week of Harvey and Irma, there are things happening in Mumbai and Nigeria. We're seeing fires, floods, droughts, and other catastrophes. And scientists say that the changes in these larger disasters, catastrophes, are at least 30% or more human-caused. And so human-caused climate change has altered the Earth in perhaps irreversible ways. And if we do not act now, the planet may become unlivable for humans. And the US, we lead in climate change denial. We're consistently insisting that the American way of life is not up for negotiation. The recent announcement that the US will pull out of the Paris Agreement heightens the reality if one of the largest nations contributing to climate change does not change its way. Reversal of these trends is impossible. So there seems to be 2 levels to climate change denial, one with governments and businesses failing to recognize the realities of climate-caused change, and then the second is the individual's psychological denial of their destructive relationship with Earth systems and their daily habits. So I'm going to have each panelist speak for a few minutes about your lens and relationship to the topic, and then I've got some specific questions.
Whoever would like to start.
Whoever would like to start, I go right ahead. Start there. We'll pass it that way.
Great. Yeah, this is a big topic, and I'd like to give you a little perspective into what's happening in the Arctic. And first of all, I think global warming is just a horribly inappropriate name for what is happening. We should be calling this issue global pollution. And living in Chicago, where everybody, there are recycling programs, but connection with nature is not a part of most people's normal day-to-day lives. And a lot of climate change or global warming solutions, they don't seem attractive to people. They don't seem to really tug at people's heartstrings, because most people in Chicago don't like winter. They like this new warmer weather. And they complain when it's cold. So I think on a society level, we have less and less connection with nature. Boulder is perhaps an exception to that. But in order to conserve and preserve and make policy changes and force companies to change their practices in order to produce less carbon dioxide, etc., we need to somehow attach a connection to the issue that people care about. And I think one of the issues is that everyone, most perhaps all the people in this room already care about this issue. But I think a lot of people in the United States it's not something they are concerned with. And we need to somehow change that narrative. Now, in the Arctic, there are a few things happening. So carbon dioxide is produced by these industrial nations, the United States, nations in Europe, China, and a lot of that carbon dioxide is funneled up north due to the Earth's high altitude convection system, high altitude winds. And that concentrates the carbon dioxide around the Arctic Ocean. And that carbon dioxide heats up that area quite a lot. In Spitsbergen, where Aud was just happened to be last week, said the temperature had increased on an annual average of 8 degrees Celsius. In other areas, it's not as extreme, but it is 2 or 3 or 4 degrees Celsius is a lot of additional temperature, and that melts ice and snow. And when you melt ice and snow, you reduce reflective capacity. The Arctic Ocean, Greenland, and Antarctica, those big ice sheets that cover those surfaces, are the Earth's primary sun reflectors. And they bounce 80+% of sun energy back out to the atmosphere. But with these increased temperatures, there is less ice and snow for that reflective mirror. So we have a widening or a growing feedback loop, where not only do we have higher temperatures, those higher temperatures melt ice, reduce the reflective capacity, which exposes dark surfaces like land and water, which absorbs 80% of sun energy. So you're attracting more sunlight and reducing ice further. And Greenland in particular is accelerating like crazy right now. And the Arctic Ocean, the sea ice has changed completely over the last 25 years. On average, 25 years ago, Arctic Ocean sea ice thickness was between 5 and 10 feet thick. Lots of multi-year ice that lived through multiple melting seasons and then could build upon itself. Now that multi-year ice is rare on the Arctic Ocean, and it's much thinner and it's much more subject to ocean currents and wind currents. So that's kind of what's happening up there. So when we went to the North Pole in 2009, the ice we encountered was completely different than the people who we had read about who went in the 1980s and the 1990s.
Climate change is a risk. The fact that we are discussing denial, it puzzles me it must come down to a misconception of the concept of risk. Risk consists of two factors: probability and consequence. And if consequence is enormous, probability doesn't have to be high. That's why you all have fire insurance on your homes. And I'm pretty sure that all the climate skeptics, they have a fire insurance on their homes. They don't go to the insurance company and ask for proof that their home will burn down. But in this discussion, it's like we have to know for sure. It's completely insane. So when you have a consequence that is so enormous, just the fact that it's a slight probability would be more than enough. And think of, no one has ever had a fire here, no one has ever had a neighbor with a fire, or maybe not even know anyone who had a fire, still you all go and buy that insurance. So why don't we do it? This can come down to a very well-known theory of the tragedy of the commons. If you look at a village with 10 farms, and around that village is a grassland which can support 100 cows, which means that every farm can have 10 cows each. Then one farmer one day discovers that the neighbor, he has 14 cows. He should then reduce to 6 cows. Will he do that? No. He will increase to 14 or 20. So the only way to regulate that would be to have some kind of agreement between them. And that's just the kind of agreement that your president withdrew from. So he's just proving the tragedy of the commons.
So what I find really interesting here is John has talked about the Arctic and the distance there. And you've talked about the sense of risk. And my feeling is politicians don't move where they see the light. They move where they feel the heat. And I think that's the case with populations as well. They don't move where they see the light. They move where they feel the heat. It's kind of why, and this is intended to be a little provocative, I don't object to fracking here in Poland, because I think fracking here is better than having oil under somebody else's soil that we're pulling out. When we feel the pain, we'll move. And that is the same reason why when I work in Yemen, or I work in India, and I see groundwater overdraft issues there, and I see the droughts and the floods and things like that, they're not dissimilar from the ones here. India has made incredible ideas starting to come out of transforming to electric cars. You know, we've got people who are working on that here, but it's also catching hold there. Part of that is because the pollution there in places like Delhi hits everybody. It's not something the wealthy can get away from. It's not something the poor can get away from. It bites. And you link that with the idea of some solution, politicians gravitate to it. It's the same to me with the question of, say, the risk and the questions of the storms that have just come upon. Unless we have those things affecting people, they're not going to feel it. And this is where some of the ethics that are important here in Boulder, we talk about being an open city that will accept people. What happens when people start wanting to move here, when we talk about density, when we talk about a lot more people being here, and the beauty that we've protected? It's that pressure that will force us to think about alternate solutions. And I think my source of optimism around climate, and I'm actually fairly optimistic, there's an Indian term, jugad, that I think captures a lot. It's kind of, creative jury rigging. It's creating new solutions. And I work in Bangkok, and I call it an upwardly mobile city. It's because everything has moved to the second and third floor. It's flooding, so they're moving upwards. And you know, now there are walking ways in the main walls that connect underneath the subway 30 feet up. Okay, there are solutions there. You look in Lyons, Colorado here. What are they doing? It's raising houses. You look in other areas, you look across the Gangetic Basin. When I was first working across the Gangetic Basin, it was mostly mud houses at flat level. Now if I go to places like Gorakhpur, central UP, Uttar Pradesh, people are raising houses by 1 to 3 meters. They're not losing everything every year to floods. We are hitting the risk thing. You buy a house up in the hills here, you can't get fire insurance. You know, there's a reason. And it's not just because you don't want it. You then can't buy a house because if you can't get insurance, you can't get a mortgage. And if you can't get a mortgage, most people can't get a house. So it comes home to bite. And it begins to drive people to look at, how do I get that insurance? Well, I have to have a fireproof house. There's all sorts of things like that that I think are driving it, and is why we have 45 sitting in the White House delivering his grand pronouncements by Twitter. But at the same time, you're not going to touch wind energy in Texas, because it's what's keeping it keeps the Dairy Queens up. If you're a small rancher and you have 10 windmills and you're getting $5,000 in royalties from each one, they're not going to take that away from you. And it also brings the kids back for work. So we have this whole question to me, if I look at the ethics of climate change, and now, where do we have points of entry? Where are our points that we can do something? And I see that possibly in the emergence of things like this, whether it's house raising, whether it's changing the economics of energy, whether it's changing how we feel risk, whether it's the tremendous problem that Omar before us was talking about, how do we make distant things proximate? So the Arctic is distant. We don't feel that here. How do we make it proximate so that we feel the heat and move? And I find the optimism in those points of things where people, it's Jugaad. People are doing all sorts of interesting things.
Thank you. So I've got some questions. The first one is directed to both John and Odd. So you've both completed incredible wilderness expeditions from the North to South Poles, included some of the coldest and some of the highest places on Earth. How does your work in these expeditions relate to climate change awareness? John, I was looking at your profile and noticed that you did something called the Global Warming 101 expedition.
Yes. The Global Warming 101 expedition took place in 2007, and for 100 days I lived in Baffin Island, which is one of the big islands of the Canadian archipelago. This island is just west of southwestern Greenland. And I ran safety and logistics for that expedition. It was a dog sled expedition, and I ended up living in 5 or 6 different coastal Inuit communities during that time. The purpose of the expedition was to link Inuit school children with school children back in Minnesota, which is where the expedition was based out of, and other places in the United States. And so that the Inuit children could talk about what their lives are like, and would also connect that with stories of their elders who grew up, in many cases, as nomadic people, or were born as nomads and then eventually started living in these small coastal villages, and talk about how the environment that they hunt in and fish in and travel in has changed over the course of their lifetime. So some of the things that came out of that expedition were just astounding. Like, basically, Inuit people, it's commonly will take their snow machine, or up there in Canada we call them skidoos, and go out on the land or out on the sea ice and fish or hunt. And some of these century-old hunting trails are now unsafe due to sea ice changing. And people have died or been stranded on ice floes for a long time, many weeks, because of these changes. There are strange birds like robins showing up in different places in the Arctic. And what we see on these expeditions is a snapshot. And we need to compare what we see to the historical record. And I wish I had some slides, but if you look at the the map or the satellite imagery of Arctic sea ice, and a lot of this work is done out of Boulder here in the National Snow and Ice Data Center. They are doing fantastic work. You can look at all of the different sea ice coverages on the Arctic Ocean and in northern Canada. And if you compare the average between 2000, before like 90, when they first started doing these satellite imagery, so like 25 years leading up to 2000, 75 to 2000, you see a nice average coverage. And then the years after that, 2005, 2007, 12, 13, the ice coming off that coverage of sea ice, that mirror that I talked about earlier, is dramatic. Areas the size of California and Texas coming off every single year. I mean, it regrows when it freezes during the wintertime, and it may freezes much thinner, but it is astounding to see what that looks like. So if you compare what we see in a glacier to a picture of the same glacier in historic times, then the results are very dramatic.
Yeah, I can support every word you said, John. I spent a lot of time in Spitsbergen, which is the furthest north you can get without getting wet. And this is where you find the most dramatic climate change, 8 degrees over the year. And it's a visible big change in 20 years. Much less ice in the fjords. Past 2 years, it's been raining on Christmas Eve. There's more snow, more avalanches, but most of all, spring is earlier, winter is coming later, there's less of the winter, it's not minus 30 anymore, it's minus 15, and so on. But this, we can bring these stories and this proof, but it comes back to, will it really affect people? What irritates me the most over the last 10-15 years is that media and all well thinkers, they have encouraged people to do, everyone should do their small thing. We should take the bike to the grocery shop, and we should collect some paper and do all these simply stupid things. Because it doesn't matter at all. It has to be some global action. And there are 15,000 chimneys in the world that is emitting 35% of the CO2. And this can be solved. 50 years after it landed on the moon, it's not difficult to clean a chimney. It costs a little bit. But this is to me, this is insane. We don't manage to get the risk into the mind of people.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think one of the biggest challenges has been you need to have big things happen, but how do you get the critical mass of incentives and right to tip it? Because it's, to go back, and this is a friend who is the former Nepali water minister, said, politicians don't move where they see the light, they move where they feel the heat. And it's the same with the voters and the people. So, to me, if we want to have a tipping in our power system, we have to feel that pain. And that is where the tremendous pollution in New Delhi has been a dialogue changer in some ways. In that, along with the heat waves that have happened, that have caused people to say, how do we get this? And if we've worked with NCAR and done looks at North India, Gangetic Basin, and the minimum heat index across about 3 months of the year is going to be at the level within about 30 years where you won't be able to live there unless you have access to air conditioning. Okay? So that frequency of heat pressure is the only thing that I can see that's going to drive major changes in the power system, the electrical system. And I see that same sort of thing in the Texas example of changing the economics here. How do we get it so it's not just, we put on the, as somebody in the last session, or the session before said, the duct tape, to make the conversation a little more pleasant. It's where do we have these things? It does need to be, I tend to think of 1,001% solutions to climate change. They all need to add up. But some of the big ones is where do we get the tipping points in the energy systems? And the driving point, I think, where we've missed it has been that it's been a dialogue that's driven by a need that is not felt by the population. So how do you create those narratives? How do you surface that?
I think you actually just jumped into my next question, but I'm going to ask it because I think you have more to say as well. Marcus, in your work engaging in climate change issues on both the local and the global level, what are some of the key issues that we need to focus on in transiting to sustainable societies in the face of climate change, and where do we start?
A small question. I mean, I think obviously there's a need for key global policies, but a key part of that is creating the social acceptability of it. We've seen the rise of fake news, we've seen all that sort of thing. How do we create the narratives that have attraction in society? Okay, that's a piece. Another piece, I think, is taking off our own blinkers. If I walk through the streets of Bangkok with most people, they don't see anything. But when I walk through it, I can see how everybody is moving everything upwards. And it's become a major thing. And it has actually, it changes the risk profile. You know, and it's in those innovations, the innovations that flip the energy system. The, you know, there's a person in this room who's been working with India on electric cars. One of the neat things there they're talking about is batteries that are standardized. Standardized batteries, that's about as boring as you can get. But it means you can plug it into any car, any vehicle, etc. And all of a sudden, that means then you have a backup at home and you can start charging it from your solar stuff. And all of a sudden you've got a thing where it really works. So seeing some of those things and getting the support things going in, that's to me the summary.
Can I have a question too?
Sure.
Norway is the #1 country when it comes to electrical cars. But I've always wondered, where does the electricity come from? And how does it help climate change?
I think that's a perfectly good hard answer. I really like our coal generated electricity. It feels just the same as everything else. One of the things that is being talked about there in India is much more distributed generation solar, and when you have standardized batteries, you can charge it wherever you are with solar. You can shift to much more green types of energy sources, and a lot of that is distributed. You know, I don't think it's a perfect solution. Scale is a huge issue, but if we don't at least start down that path, we're not going to flip.
Thank you. So my next question is to all three of you. And I got excited that Otto's from Norway, because one of the classes I teach is deep ecology, and the founder of the deep ecology movement is Arne Næss, who's a famous Norwegian. And so, let's see, with Arne Næss, he furthered the principles of biospheric egalitarianism, which is basically saying the inherent rights of nature, and as well as Friluftsliv, open air living, which is also related as the greening of cities. And also one of the other important principles that I'd like to bring up, which is one of the heaviest, is the need for a drastic reduction of the human population over time. How do our panelists relate to these ideas within our current situation?
Somebody else should start. I've had too much airtime. Go ahead.
My only claim to this is I happen to know him, Arne Næss. Yeah. So I know him quite well, in fact. But I'm, as not being a native in English, what is topology?
Topology?
Yeah?
With the, that I said, or?
Yes?
Oh, deep ecology?
How many type of species, is that mean, or?
Biologic egalitarianism.
Okay, yeah. Arne was deeply into that, yes. But he was also, he was a philosopher, and I said was because he reached the age of 97, I think, and he lived until a few years ago. But he was also on the, this is not a problem for the planet, it's only a problem for us. And 99.9999% of all species that's ever lived on the planet is gone. And we will be gone too. It's just a matter of postponing it. And reducing the population in the world, we can take care of that easily, just continue. So we're really talking, we shouldn't push the polar bear in front of us. We're talking about surviving ourselves. And the planet does not have a problem with 3 degrees more. If you go back a billion years or two, the whole planet was covered by 300-meter thick ice, but it survived that too. But it will be worse for us, and I'm not very positive on it, because if it starts melting like Greenland, and Greenland itself, I've crossed Greenland many times. I did it last year, where the ice cap starts. We were there late April. It should be deep winter. It was plus 24 Celsius. And it had been so warm for a long period. And the rivers were huge. And if Greenland ice cap disappears, water will increase. Is it 2 meters, 3 meters? A lot of cities can say goodbye. They already started moving in Bangkok.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to answer this question because I think that, like I said earlier, so many people, for this issue is just not on their radar. They are worried about their day-to-day lives. They're worried about where their next meal comes from. They're worried about how their kids are doing. And like, I see that we have to figure out how to change the narrative to make an impact. And the fact that we're fighting about it just makes it more and more difficult. Can you repeat the other pieces of the question?
Let's see, so the rights of nature, green living, and reduction of the human population.
Right. I mean, we talked about this a little bit in the previous panel, and somebody in the crowd mentioned, well, it's not about it's not about reducing the population, it's about reducing the amount of resources the human population uses. I mean, when you get around to it, controlling birth rates is a horribly sticky issue that I don't even think we're remotely close to tackling that. I mean, China tried, but everywhere else in the world has looked strangely at China for doing that. So I'd like to think that there is an economic benefit and a positive life story for society and individuals to reducing the amount of resources that we use in daily life. And I think that story I am more optimistic about than trying to figure out how to reduce the number of humans on Earth.
Just a comment on the number of people. The number of people is not necessarily negative. The more people we are, the more ideas. The rate of innovation has never been higher, and it's proven that. And every day the whole world wakes up and wants to create a better life for themselves and their families. And this is an enormous force. So we have to save ourselves, and the more ideas, the easier it will be. I'm not a believer in it will be a better world with 2 billion, and I don't know who the 2 billion will be.
I mean, to me, if you look at the graph of population, it's exactly like the graph of CO2. And no biologic species has ever gone like this and not had some change in that trajectory. I think that there's, you can go through the collapse scenarios, you can also go through the innovation, and as people get wealthier, people have fewer kids. And that there is a change in that, and then you get an S curve and it stabilizes. But I think a lot of that comes back to me to the question of this question of kind of egalitarianism. Okay, can we share better what we have? Is it got to be so differently distributed? Can we produce it in a way that's more innovative? And I think that that innovation being driven by things that mean something in people's daily lives, rather than our big abstract ideas. This is a theme that I return to continuously. And it is where I feel, both a huge amount of worry about the future, not for the planet. I started out as a geologist, and we can be seen as dinosaurs ourselves. I mean, many people would see that. But there is a place where there's been some really interesting work at the Santa Fe Institute about density of population and how that generates innovation, where the density, where patents come from. And if you look at it in some of the places I've been where you wouldn't expect innovation. I mean, I got my Xeroxes off an irrigation pump set in Gujarat because people took what was an irrigation pump set, they took that out and they said, well, this is only useful for a couple of months a year. I'll stick a generator on it. And then I'll be able to have, and there are trucks that are, this is Jugaad. So they're creating something new out of pieces. And this is where I think there's huge optimism. And if you give them the building blocks of that, a battery that can be replaced, energy is a core thing for all sorts of things. Without energy, you can't have communication, you can't have markets, you can't have a lot of sharing of ideas. So you get that out there, whether it's the cell phone, whether it's other things, and all of a sudden there's a blossoming of things. And we need to just take off our blinkers at times and see those and help amplify them. And that's where I find more optimism.
Okay, we have time for one more question before we open it up to questions from the audience. And let's see. I wouldn't let Odd see my questions ahead of time. And I was actually reading about you last night, and I found it really interesting that you've written a fiction trilogy, and a lot of it is about, from my perception, it seemed about the deception and manipulation within elite structures of patriarchy and the economic paradigm. And I was wondering that if your work seems to provide a unique lens into the paradigm supporting climate change, denial, and exploitation of the planet, and if you could speak to this.
That's a tricky one, but you knew that. That's why he came. The books are based on the theorem that everyone becomes a thief if they get the chance, and especially if they can't be caught. So all the trilogy builds on that. If you relate it to climate change and see it's of course parallel. And as you said, why can't we distribute the resources better? Why should we be rich and all the others poor and so on? I think deep inside we are still animals. Just the notion that we are going to share, to give away half our wealth to someone else we don't know, it's not going to happen. So how this distribution is going to happen, I don't have the faintest idea. But if we needed to, we would cheat on statistics, on everything. We will do anything to keep our wealth. We would do anything. We would use weapons. We would nuke them. We would never let go of our wealth. So and I think it has to be like something major, and it could be something with nuclear weapons to change the balance. Otherwise, we can help the others to a better life, but we won't give up our own.
Maybe I could, throw that out to Marcus and John. Just the idea of this business as usual paradigm and its link to climate change.
I think Harold is saying somewhat similar to what I was saying. People don't move where they see the light, they move where they feel the heat. Redistribution can come from two directions. place. It can come from people seeing a real advantage to themselves, okay, and a place where it really means something, or it can come from oppression. You have the optimistic perspective of nuclear weapons being the main pressure. I think that probably there are lower grades of pressure that can come on that. Sometimes it's the election box. I mean, it's interesting to see Texas being a proponent of, or the Texas population being heavily against climate change, but at the same time, you're not going to touch our windmills. And I think that's the kind of change where when it creates incentives, you actually do get changes. And if that can help, the innovation can emerge in ways that actually help people generate wealth in different areas, you have a lot of optimism in that. So I think it's a very hard road to hoe to say, let's redistribute and be more equitable. I think there is a strong tragedy of the commons Garrett Hardin type of behavior in there. But I do think that there are places where we can set our political and other structures in ways that do generate much more equality, and that's some of that is just allowing voices. And the voices create heat.
Well, Av will know better than I, but it seems that this redistribution of wealth is working pretty well in Scandinavia.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure there's a lot of hair on that issue, and it's not as simple as that. And it does help to have tapped into a whole bunch of oil in the North Sea. But at the same time, when I go to Norway, I feel that a sense of something. Like there is a Team Norway concept there that doesn't exist in the States because we are so bifurcated and fighting each other. And I think there are political divides in Norway as well. But I mean, people point to the space race and the coming together of that. And the world is a much more complicated place now. But I think one of the reasons people are fighting so much in the United States along these political divides, no matter what other topics involved, you're going to be a Democrat, Republican, people are going to line up on support their team is they want to be a part of something. So there needs to be, whether it's a global crisis of some sort that is linked to climate or something else, epidemics or whatever the trigger is that can cause our country and hopefully other countries as well to want to cooperate and be behind the same thing. I mean, I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm slightly optimistic there's something there.
I see a threat from outer space.
Yeah, we have this Scandinavian model, as you know. And it works pretty well. Inequality in Norway is growing. It's not big, but it's been growing for 40, 50 years, statistics say. And when it comes to Norway as a nation, we are the biggest contributor in aid, but it's still only 1% of BNP. And the political parties that want to increase it to 2%, they lose. So we are not ready, even though we are a very equal society, we are not ready to give away much to people we don't know. We start drilling in very sensitive areas, the most beautiful areas in the world, and we do it for future oil revenue, and it can't be stopped. The only way it can be stopped because it's stupid in an economic sense. Long before those oil reserves are empty, we will be beyond the oil age. So, but I'm not optimistic about redistribution.
Just one word, and that is, you used a key word, people we don't know. I think the more we know people, the more likely we are willing to share.
Thank you. Okay, so for our remaining time, we want to hear questions from the audience, and I'll preface this that we want to hear questions and not mini talks.
Just say it.
Just yell it out.
I'm curious about, we didn't say much about solar panels here. but the little bit I've been reading, it seems like solar panels are around the world in a lot of places, and in Africa they're providing electricity, and it seems to me we could be changing, and I'm wondering what you folks know, we could change our economy a lot if we put more money into solar panel production and research. And I'm surprised, I didn't even know about windmills in Texas, because I don't even think of wind there. But why don't they even become leaders in solar panels? Or maybe they are, and we don't know.
I'll say a few things on this. I'm not a solar expert. But an awful lot of the challenge in getting widespread adoption, there is huge growth of solar in India, in China, in places like this. A lot of the challenge here is the economic structures. It's because, if you put it on your house, the question is, can you sell the power back to the grid? There's a lot of resistance to that. Well, we do, but we do it in a small way. And there's a lot of resistance to that from the utilities. And there's one of the things that places like India are talking about doing, for example, in these batteries, again, is a massive government buy and government-driven standardization, but to drive down the cost right at the start. So it's that kind of combination there. It's not that it's technically impossible or difficult, but it's getting the economic structures right so that it really means it. And there are a lot of strong interests who don't see that as, you talk about people not wanting to give it up. Go to a monopoly that's got a good batch of investments in coal power and say, by the way, how about if we just replace all that with solar, and it's going to be right at the local level, all these people selling it to you. And they go, well, it doesn't really match our economic future too well.
I think you had a question?
Yes, I did. I had a question. About 25 years ago, the Snowmass Institute folks there said that we could reach a tipping point, and our carrying capacity was very close, and we're definitely at that 25-year point, but yet the carrying capacity seems to be moving forward, kind of a tipping point. How do we know when we're at that tipping point? And then all bets are off, no matter what.
We don't know. And it's a bit late to buy the insurance, and the house is already on fire.
Say the same. I mean, there's a lot of work going on tipping points. Stockholm Resilience Center is heavily focused on that on a global level. But there's not a clear...
But this discussion on proof of that ruins the whole thing, because it's a concept of, is it really happening or not? That's where the risk is going wrong. It's just the fact that it's possible should be enough.
So we've got this gentleman in the corner.
Yes, my question is this to the panel. In Boulder County, we face an existential threat of fracking in neighborhoods and near our schools. Do you think that if they do put fracking wells near our schools or our neighborhoods, I mean, 2 people just got incinerated recently up in Firestone, killed because they didn't cap the wells properly. Do you think that people have a moral responsibility to possibly blow up wells and end fracking if it's threatening, is an existential threat?
Who's going to answer that?
Recorders are all.
Yeah, I think, as I think that it was, trying to remember who wrote the Foundation trilogy. Isaac Asimov said, violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. I think that there are ways of changing things without going to violence. I think that the point is, yes, finally the pain is hitting here. Too many people are comfortable driving their SUVs and buying oil from Nigeria. Okay? We need, as a society, to feel that pain if we're going to shift. So I would say the moral responsibility is push your utilities to shift towards more green stuff, make it non-economic, make it a social dialogue, and recognize that it needs to be a whole society that needs to feel that pressure. That's my feeling.
Yes, over here.
First I have to say that I have solar on my house. My entire south side roof is covered with solar. What I want to know is, does Naropa have solar? And I get a check at the end of every year from Excel, because I produce more than I use. Go ahead.
Naropa has a little bit of solar, but years ago, I think we were one of the first in the area, we went to the 100% wind power. And so Naropa has wind power, we're zero waste, we grow food on our campus, and also our board, about 5 years, voted, and now we do socially responsible investing with our trust, our very small endowment.
I was just thinking, as long as all these people are here, we should be able to sign something and make a statement and pass it to CU Boulder, pass it to all the public schools, and let them know there's a community that wants to.
And I believe last year, and you probably know better, the city of Boulder signed, I forget what it was, but there's a whole proclamation about going, yeah.
I mean, I know that Boulder is trying to shift towards green energy, but I think everybody in this room faces contradictions. I face a huge contradiction. I work on climate, and I fly all over the world to do it. Okay? I can buy carbon offsets. Do I believe they work? Not really. You know, there's a huge contradiction. So to me, the question is, can you see those innovations? Can you see things that are emerging that change the structure? And it's like changing the structure of the power system. Where are the points of entry that can flip that? When you look at risk and the impacts, where are the things that are points of entry that change that risk profile? That's why I brought up, you know, it's not rocket science, but the people in the Gangetic Basin who are raising their houses, they're not losing things every 3 years or every year to flooding. And if they gain wealth because their house isn't flooded, they don't lose their motorcycle, they don't lose their sewing machine, they don't lose their rice. And that goes on for 30 years. All of a sudden, their kids are educated and doing who knows what. And there's a flip that happens. And that, to me, is you know, can we see those? And then can we amplify them? Because there are 10% of the people in that area who can't do it because they just can't afford it. So that's the...
Maybe you had your hand up.
Oh, thank you. Just what you said. Where are the key points, the structure? I'd like you to address that very question. And when you say how do we change the narrative? Who's the we? What are the key institutions, groups, powerful people, whatever, that can change the narrative? How do you go about changing the narrative? I agree we need to do that, but who's the we and how do we do it? I'd like to have, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I'd like to hear, where are those key structures and tipping points, and is anyone identifying them, or who the power structure is we need to change? And I mean, I'd like to see how we go about doing that, and who needs to do it, and how we do it.
My response, maybe you have different ones, is I don't think there is an audience. A policymaker is a mythical beast.
Right.
Okay.
It's multiple.
There are, you know, I think of the world as not as stakeholders, but as stake gainers and stake losers. But it's, can you see those things? Well, you look around here, there's a tremendous change happening up in the hills about how building happens because of fire frequency. There's a tremendous change that's going to be happening in India if they actually do the battery types of things. So each of us needs to identify those things that are points of optimism And if a lot of people are working on that, whether it's here in this community in Boulder and coming out of innovative ideas, other areas, that's where you get your 1,001% solutions emerging.
But each of us, I don't have the capacity, skill, time, or energy to be one of those people who can do the identification. But
Paul
who
Hawken.
does?
Can I
Paul
add something
Hawken.
here? I think this has to be done one individual at a time. And we're a broadcaster, for example, I'm part of ZEE. India is very, very particular about heroes and heroines because they're a huge Bollywood industry. Somewhere, if you're able to use those as mediums of change to create that awareness that you're talking about.
The Amitabh Bachchan.
Yeah, that whole kind of narrative. So in my view, this is not about a Trump administration here or a Modi government in India. It's about we feeling the pinch and the desire, right? Social, for example. So if we use popular figures, even out here from Hollywood, and if they're able to give that message which makes people at least start thinking about doing it separately, at least start thinking, I think that could be a very
So we have a lot of hands and really time for one last question. And I think you had your hand up.
This is kind of out of the vein of what we've been recently talking about. You touched on it. You touched on this when you were speaking, but I was curious. The physical geography of the Arctic is changing and is going to continue to change. And that comes with all of this new access to resources. And I'm curious if you imagine the most positive future for the Arctic, what does that look like in terms of management and avoidance of tragedy of the commons type situation? Simple.
For the few people living up there, global warming is not a problem, as John said. They would like it to be a little bit warmer. For the animal life, yes, it's not that good, but they will survive, maybe have less of them. I'm not that concerned about the Arctic itself, but the repercussions and the signals it gives for the rest of the world. Because, as John said, most of the sun radiation that hits snow is radiated back, 90% in fact. If it hits the water, only 5% goes out. So if there is no ice on the polar sea, the sea warms up. It's a problem for the Arctic, yes, it's a much bigger problem for the rest of the world. I see that if it's where I go, if it's minus 20 or minus 14, it doesn't matter that much, it's still cold. I have to go around the corner, 2 more corners to find a polar bear, doesn't matter that much. But for the rest of the world, this is what you have in the mines, this is a whistleblower, it's a canary bird that's telling what's really going on.
So I want to, in a moment, give a few minutes of, just thanking the panelists, but I also just want to thank everyone for showing up for this important dialogue. And a lot of the work I do is around the psychology behind climate change. And with taking in so much information, we often start getting tight in our body and getting into our defense mechanisms, even if we feel like we're open to everything that's being discussed. So I'd ask everyone as you're leaving today to really take deep breaths and notice where you're feeling tight and notice where this conversation may spiral out a little bit more. And I especially want to thank our 3 panelists for being here